Right now, someone is playing chess while you're playing checkers. They're thinking 5 moves ahead while you're reacting to the last move they made. They understand the game, the real game, while you're still reading the rules they wrote to keep you disadvantaged. But here's what they don't want you to know. You can learn their strategies, master their tactics, and beat them at their own game without becoming them, without sacrificing your soul, without losing the core values that make you who you are. Tonight, we explore the ultimate challenge of modern existence: how to outsmart the world without losing your soul through Machiavellian tactics refined by wisdom, guided by principle, and executed with precision. In the grand theater of human ambition, there exists a false dichotomy that has trapped countless capable individuals in cycles of defeat and frustration. The belief that you must choose between being good and being effective, between maintaining your integrity and achieving your objectives, between preserving your authentic self and mastering the strategic intelligence necessary to navigate a world where others play by different rules than the ones they taught you to follow. Tonight, we ascend beyond this limiting choice to explore a more sophisticated path, the way of the ethical strategist, who understands that true power comes not from abandoning your values, but from implementing them with such strategic brilliance that you achieve your authentic objectives while maintaining the moral foundation that gives those objectives meaning. We will discover how Niccolo Machiavelli's insights, properly understood, provide not a blueprint for moral corruption, but a masterclass in strategic thinking that can be applied by those who refuse to compromise their essential character, while refusing to accept defeat from those who have no such scruples. Through the strategic genius of Niccolo Machiavelli himself, who understood that true virtue requires not just good intentions, but the practical wisdom to make those intentions effective in a complex world, through the psychological insights of Carl Jung, who revealed that authentic power requires the integration of your complete self, including your capacity for strategic thinking and calculated action, through the will-to-power philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche, who recognized that creating your own values requires the strength to implement them in a world that may resist your vision, through the game theory wisdom of those who understand that cooperation and competition can be strategically combined, and through the insights of modern psychology that reveal how influence operates through understanding rather than manipulation, we will develop a comprehensive system for strategic excellence that enhances rather than compromises your authentic self. By the end of this philosophical and practical journey, you will possess the intellectual tools to read any situation accurately, influence any outcome ethically, and achieve your objectives through methods that strengthen rather than weaken your character, that build rather than destroy your relationships, that create rather than extract value from the world around you. The question that will determine whether you remain a victim of others' strategic superiority or become a master of ethical influence is this: are you ready to learn how to be strategically brilliant while remaining authentically good, how to win decisively while playing fairly, how to outsmart everyone while becoming more yourself? The foundation: understanding true Machiavellian wisdom. Niccolo Machiavelli has been perhaps the most misunderstood philosopher in history, his name synonymous with ruthless manipulation, when his actual insights provide the foundation for ethical effectiveness in a complex world. His core principle, that the ends can justify the means, is not advocacy for amorality, but recognition that good intentions without effective methods often produce results that contradict those intentions. Machiavelli's concept of virtù represents not virtue in the modern sense, but rather the ability to adapt your methods to circumstances while maintaining commitment to your fundamental objectives. The truly Machiavellian person can be gentle when gentleness serves their purposes, and firm when firmness is required, generous when generosity builds valuable relationships, and strategic when strategy prevents exploitation. This adaptability requires what Machiavelli called the lion and the fox, the ability to be strong when strength is required, the lion, and clever when cleverness is more effective, the fox. Most people limit themselves to only one approach, making them predictable and therefore vulnerable to those who can employ both strength and cunning as circumstances demand. The first principle of ethical Machiavellianism is situational awareness, the ability to read environments, people, and circumstances accurately enough to choose the approach most likely to produce your desired outcome. This means developing skills that most people never cultivate: the ability to detect deception, to understand others' motivations, to recognize power dynamics, and to identify opportunities that others miss. Situational awareness begins with understanding that people rarely say what they mean or mean what they say when their interests are involved. They communicate through subtext, implications, and strategic omissions rather than direct statements. Learning to read these indirect communications gives you access to information that determines outcomes while remaining invisible to those who communicate and listen only at surface levels. The second principle is strategic patience, the understanding that timing often determines success more than the quality of your ideas or the intensity of your effort. The Machiavellian strategist learns to wait for the right moment rather than forcing action when conditions don't support success, to prepare thoroughly rather than reacting impulsively, to think in terms of campaigns rather than battles. Strategic patience requires emotional discipline that most people lack, the ability to suppress immediate gratification in service of longer-term objectives, to endure temporary disadvantage while positioning for permanent advantage, to maintain consistency of effort even when results are not immediately visible. The third principle is resource conservation, the recognition that your time, energy, attention, and social capital are limited resources that must be invested strategically rather than spent carelessly. This means learning to say no to opportunities that don't align with your primary objectives, to avoid conflicts that don't serve your interests, to invest your efforts where they will produce the greatest return. Resource conservation also means understanding that not every battle needs to be fought, that not every wrong needs to be corrected, that not every slight needs to be answered. The strategic person picks their battles based on what serves their long-term objectives rather than what satisfies their immediate emotional reactions. Reading people, the psychology of strategic assessment. The foundation of ethical influence lies in accurate assessment of the people you encounter, understanding their motivations, predicting their behavior, and recognizing how they make decisions under different circumstances. This is not manipulation, but practical psychology applied to real-world situations where misreading people can have significant consequences. Carl Jung's insights into personality types provide a framework for understanding that different people operate according to different psychological patterns. Some are motivated primarily by logic and analysis, others by emotions and relationships, still others by immediate sensory experience or long-term visionary possibilities. Effective influence requires adapting your communication and approach to match others' psychological preferences rather than assuming everyone thinks like you do. The introvert processes information internally before speaking and prefers depth over breadth in relationships and topics. Approaching introverts with high-energy, rapid-fire communication often overwhelms them and reduces your influence. Instead, providing time for processing, asking thoughtful questions, and demonstrating respect for their need to think before responding increases your effectiveness with introverted personalities. The extrovert processes information externally through talking and prefers breadth over depth in relationships and activities. Approaching extroverts with slow, detailed internal processing often bores them and reduces engagement. Instead, encouraging discussion, providing variety and stimulation, and matching their energy level increases your influence with extroverted personalities. Understanding thinking versus feeling preferences helps predict how people make decisions. Thinking types prioritize logic, consistency, and objective analysis, even when personal feelings are involved. Feeling types prioritize values, relationships, and the impact of decisions on people, even when logic suggests different choices. When influencing thinking types, present logical arguments, provide data and analysis, demonstrate consistency between your recommendations and stated principles, and avoid appeals based solely on emotion or relationship considerations. When influencing feeling types, Emphasize how your proposals affect people, align your suggestions with their values, demonstrate personal commitment and authenticity, and include relationship considerations in your reasoning. Sensing versus intuitive preferences determine how people gather and process information. Sensing types focus on concrete details, immediate realities, and practical applications. Intuitive types focus on possibilities, future potential, and theoretical frameworks. When communicating with sensing types, provide specific examples, practical applications, and step-by-step processes. Avoid abstract theories without concrete connections to immediate reality. When communicating with intuitive types, emphasize possibilities, long-term vision, and theoretical frameworks. Avoid getting bogged down in details without connecting to bigger picture implications. Beyond personality types, strategic assessment requires understanding people's current life situations, pressures, and priorities. The person facing financial stress makes different decisions than the person feeling financially secure. The individual dealing with relationship problems approaches opportunities differently than someone whose personal life is stable. Effective assessment also requires recognizing that people's stated priorities often differ from their actual priorities, and their conscious motivations often differ from their unconscious drives. The manager who claims to prioritize team development may actually prioritize avoiding conflict. The colleague who emphasizes company loyalty may actually prioritize job security above organizational success. Learning to identify these hidden motivations requires attention to patterns rather than statements, what people consistently do rather than what they say they value, where they invest their time and energy rather than what they claim is important, how they behave under pressure rather than how they present themselves during calm periods. The art of strategic communication. Machiavellian communication operates through multiple layers simultaneously. The surface message that everyone hears, the subtext that conveys your actual meaning to those sophisticated enough to understand it, and the strategic purpose that serves your long-term objectives while appearing to serve immediate practical needs. The principle of strategic ambiguity allows you to communicate in ways that can be interpreted differently by different audiences, while maintaining plausible deniability about any interpretation that might create problems for you. This is not deception but precision, saying exactly what you mean to those who need to understand your meaning, while avoiding unnecessary conflict with those who would resist direct statements. For example, when dealing with a difficult colleague, instead of direct confrontation that might escalate conflict, strategic ambiguity might involve saying, "I've noticed that some approaches seem to work better than others in this environment, and I'm always interested in finding the most effective methods." This communicates to the colleague that you've noticed their ineffective methods while giving them opportunity to improve without public embarrassment, and provides you with documentation of having addressed the issue if it continues. Strategic questioning serves multiple functions: gathering information you need for decision-making, influencing others' thinking process, and creating commitment to conclusions they reach through their own analysis, rather than your direct persuasion. People support conclusions they feel they've discovered more strongly than conclusions you present to them as accomplished facts. Instead of telling someone, "Your current approach isn't working and you need to change it," strategic questioning might involve asking, "What results are you seeing from your current approach? How do those results compare to what you hope to achieve? What factors do you think might be contributing to the gap? What adjustments might improve your outcomes?" This sequence allows the person to recognize problems with their approach through their own analysis, makes improvement seem like their idea rather than your criticism, and increases the likelihood that they'll actually implement changes because they've participated in identifying the solution. The timing of communication often determines its effectiveness more than its content. The same message delivered at different times can produce completely different results depending on the recipient's current emotional state, situational pressures, and competing priorities. Strategic timing requires patience to wait for optimal moments rather than communicating whenever you feel ready. attention to others' cycles and patterns so you can predict when they'll be most receptive, and flexibility to adjust your timeline based on changing circumstances rather than rigid adherence to predetermined schedules. The principle of calculated disclosure involves sharing information strategically rather than automatically, understanding that information is power that should be invested for specific returns rather than given away without consideration of consequences. This doesn't mean being secretive about everything, but rather being intentional about what you share, when you share it, and with whom. Some information becomes more valuable when shared immediately. Other information gains value when withheld until the optimal moment. And still other information loses value if shared at all. Learning to distinguish between these categories and act accordingly gives you significant advantages over those who communicate without strategic consideration. Building alliances without sacrificing autonomy. One of Machiavelli's most sophisticated insights concerns the delicate balance between cooperation and independence, how to build valuable relationships and alliances while maintaining the autonomy necessary for authentic self-expression and strategic flexibility. This balance requires understanding that true allies support your success rather than requiring your limitation as the price of their assistance. The principle of mutual benefit provides the foundation for sustainable alliances. Rather than seeking relationships where you extract value from others, or they extract value from you, strategic alliance building focuses on creating situations where all parties gain more from cooperation than they could achieve independently. This requires moving beyond transactional thinking, where each interaction is evaluated as a separate exchange, toward relational thinking, where the cumulative value of ongoing cooperation exceeds the cost of any individual investment in the relationship. Strategic generosity involves giving first in ways that demonstrate your value, while creating psychological reciprocity that motivates others to contribute to your objectives. However, this generosity must be calculated rather than automatic, targeted rather than universal, and conditional on appropriate response rather than continued regardless of others' behavior. The key is to be generous in ways that showcase capabilities others need while requiring little from your limited resources. Sharing knowledge, making strategic introductions, providing recognition or endorsement, offering insights based on your experience, these forms of generosity can be extremely valuable to recipients while costing you relatively little. However, strategic generosity must be combined with strategic boundaries. The person who gives endlessly without expecting appropriate reciprocation trains others to take their contributions for granted, while never developing their own capacity to contribute value to the relationship. True alliance requires mutual contribution rather than one-sided giving. The principle of graduated commitment allows you to build alliances progressively rather than making total commitments before others have demonstrated their reliability, competence, and commitment to mutual benefit. This protects you from allies who promise more than they deliver, while allowing genuine relationships to develop naturally through proven performance. Graduated commitment begins with small, low-risk collaborations that allow both parties to assess compatibility and capability before increasing investment in the relationship. As trust is earned through consistent performance, commitment can be increased accordingly. This approach protects you from betrayal while encouraging others to prove themselves worthy of greater trust and investment. Strategic communication within alliances requires balancing transparency with discretion. Allies need enough information to understand your objectives and contribute effectively, but they don't need access to information that could be used against you if the alliance fails or their loyalties shift. The skill lies in sharing information that enables collaboration while retaining information that maintains your independent strategic options. This is not deception, but prudence, providing what others need to help you while protecting what you need to help yourself if their help becomes unavailable. Alliance maintenance requires regular assessment of whether relationships continue to serve mutual benefit or have become one-sided extraction disguised as cooperation. People's circumstances, priorities, and capabilities change over time, and alliances that once served everyone involved may evolve into arrangements that benefit some parties at others' expense. The strategic person monitors alliance health through attention to reciprocity patterns, communication quality, and outcomes, rather than assuming that past beneficial relationships will automatically continue to serve everyone's interests. When alliances become unbalanced, they require renegotiation or termination to prevent them from becoming sources of drain rather than mutual enhancement. The tactics of ethical influence. True influence operates through understanding and alignment rather than manipulation and coercion. The Machiavellian approach to influence focuses on creating situations where others choose to support your objectives, because doing so serves their interests, values, or authentic desires rather than because they've been pressured, deceived, or manipulated into compliance. The principle of aligned interests requires understanding what others genuinely want and need, then presenting your objectives in ways that demonstrate how your success serves their authentic interests. This is not manipulation, because you're not creating false connections. You're identifying and highlighting real connections that might not be immediately obvious. For example, if you need resources for a project that will benefit your career, aligned interests approach involves demonstrating how the project's success will benefit those who control the resources through improved outcomes, enhanced reputation, solved problems, or created opportunities that serve their authentic objectives. The contrast approach presents options in ways that make your preferred choice appear obviously superior by comparison to clearly inferior alternatives. This works because people make decisions based on relative comparison rather than absolute evaluation, and the presence of poor options makes moderate options appear excellent. However, ethical contrast requires that your preferred option actually is superior for the decision-maker's interests, not just for your own. The alternatives you present should be genuinely inferior rather than artificially constructed to make your preference appear better than it actually is. The authority principle leverages people's natural tendency to defer to legitimate expertise and experience when making decisions in areas where they lack knowledge or confidence. This influence operates through demonstrating rather than claiming expertise, through providing value rather than demanding recognition, through earning credibility rather than assuming it. Ethical authority influence requires that you actually possess the expertise you're leveraging, that your recommendations serve others' interests rather than just your own, and that you're willing to admit the limits of your knowledge rather than pretending universal expertise. The scarcity principle recognizes that people value opportunities more highly when they perceive those opportunities to be limited in availability or duration. However, ethical scarcity requires that the limitations be genuine rather than artificially manufactured, that the urgency serve authentic practical purposes rather than pressure tactics. The social proof principle operates through people's tendency to look to others' behavior as guidance for their own decisions, especially in situations where they feel uncertain about the best course of action. Ethical social proof involves providing examples of how similar people have benefited from similar decisions, rather than creating false impressions of popularity or success. The commitment and consistency principle leverages people's psychological need to align their behavior with their stated values and previous commitments. Ethical application involves helping people recognize how your suggestions align with values they've already expressed and commitments they've already made, rather than trying to manipulate them into commitments that don't serve their authentic interests. Information control and strategic intelligence. Information is the currency of strategic advantage, and learning to gather, analyze, and deploy information effectively provides sustainable competitive advantages that don't depend on luck, connections, or circumstances beyond your control. However, information strategy must be balanced with ethical considerations that maintain your integrity while providing the intelligence necessary for effective decision-making. Active listening serves as the foundation of information gathering. Most people listen poorly because they're formulating their response while others are speaking, focusing on what they want to say rather than what they're hearing. Strategic listening involves complete attention to verbal and non-verbal communication, questions that encourage elaboration, and patience that allows others to reveal more than they intended. Strategic questions gather information while appearing to serve the other person's interests rather than your intelligence needs. What's working well for you in this situation provides information about their strengths and advantages. What challenges are you facing reveals problems and vulnerabilities. What would ideal outcomes look like exposes their priorities and objectives. The principle of triangulation involves gathering information about situations and people from multiple sources rather than relying on single sources that may provide incomplete or biased perspectives. This doesn't mean spying or investigating people inappropriately, but rather paying attention to different viewpoints and cross-referencing information to develop accurate understanding. Pattern recognition allows you to identify trends and predict behavior based on consistent patterns rather than isolated incidents. People tend to behave consistently over time, organizations develop predictable patterns of operation, and markets follow recognizable cycles that can be understood and anticipated by those who invest effort in pattern analysis. However, pattern recognition must be balanced with awareness that patterns can change, that exceptional circumstances can disrupt normal patterns, and that assuming patterns will continue without confirmation can lead to significant miscalculations. Information security requires protecting valuable information from those who might use it against your interests, while sharing appropriate information with those who need it to help you achieve your objectives. This balance requires judgment about who can be trusted with different types of information and under what circumstances. The strategic person protects information that could be used to predict their behavior, compromise their negotiating positions, or exploit their vulnerabilities, while sharing information that builds relationships, demonstrates competence, or encourages others to provide information in return. Disinformation defense involves recognizing when others are providing false or misleading information, whether intentionally or through their own misunderstanding. This requires verification of important information through independent sources, attention to inconsistencies that might indicate deception or error, and understanding of others' motivations that might encourage them to provide inaccurate information. Strategic intelligence synthesis involves combining information from multiple sources to develop insights that wouldn't be apparent from any single source, identifying connections between seemingly unrelated pieces of information, and using accumulated intelligence to predict future developments and opportunities. Timing and opportunity recognition. Machiavelli understood that successful action requires the intersection of preparation and opportunity, being ready to act when circumstances align favorably, rather than forcing action when conditions don't support success. This requires both the patience to wait for optimal timing and the decisiveness to act quickly when optimal timing arrives. Cycle recognition involves understanding that most environments operate in predictable patterns: business cycles, seasonal patterns, personal mood and energy cycles, organizational attention cycles. Strategic timing aligns action with favorable phases of relevant cycles rather than working against natural patterns. For example, proposing new initiatives when organizations are focused on crisis management rarely succeeds because attention and resources are directed elsewhere. However, the same proposals presented during periods of stability and growth often receive positive reception because they align with organizational capacity for new ventures. Window identification focuses on recognizing temporary opportunities that require immediate action rather than extended preparation. These windows often open due to changing circumstances, personnel transitions, market shifts, or competitive advantages that won't last indefinitely. Strategic opportunity recognition requires balancing preparation for anticipated opportunities with readiness to exploit unexpected opportunities that couldn't be predicted but can be recognized and acted upon quickly by those prepared to move decisively. The principle of strategic patience involves understanding when to act and when to wait, when to push forward with initiatives and when to allow situations to develop naturally. This requires emotional discipline to suppress immediate desires for action when waiting serves better outcomes. Strategic patience is not passive waiting, but active preparation during waiting periods, developing capabilities, building relationships, gathering information, and positioning resources so that when optimal timing arrives, you're ready to act more effectively than competitors who haven't prepared as thoroughly. Momentum recognition involves understanding when situations are developing in your favor and additional action will accelerate positive trends versus when situations are developing unfavorably and additional action might accelerate negative trends that would naturally reverse if left alone. The skilled strategist learns to add effort when momentum is building in favorable directions, while reducing effort when momentum is building in unfavorable directions, allowing natural forces to work in their favor rather than working against those forces unnecessarily. Negotiation and persuasion mastery. Ethical persuasion operates through understanding rather than manipulation, through alignment rather than coercion, through creating value rather than extracting concessions. The goal is to achieve outcomes that serve your interests while also serving the interests of those you're persuading, creating sustainable agreements rather than temporary victories. Preparation determines negotiation outcomes more than talent or luck. This involves understanding your own priorities, what you must achieve versus what you would like to achieve, what you can concede versus what you cannot compromise. It also involves understanding others' priorities through research, observation, and strategic questioning. The principle of multiple options involves presenting choices rather than single proposals, allowing others to feel they're making decisions rather than simply accepting or rejecting your terms. However, all options should be acceptable to you, though some may be more favorable than others. This approach works because people prefer making choices to being presented with ultimatums, and they're more likely to accept outcomes they feel they've selected from alternatives than outcomes that appear to be imposed upon them without options. Strategic anchoring influences negotiations by establishing initial reference points that shape subsequent discussions. The person who presents the first specific proposal often influences the range of outcomes that both parties consider reasonable because initial proposals serve as anchors around which negotiations revolve. However, anchoring must be realistic rather than extreme. Anchors that are too far from reasonable outcomes often backfire by making you appear unreasonable rather than ambitious, damaging your credibility rather than establishing favorable reference points. The principle of reciprocal concession involves making strategic compromises that encourage others to make corresponding concessions, creating momentum toward mutually acceptable outcomes. However, your concessions should be planned rather than spontaneous, designed to elicit specific responses rather than given freely without strategic purpose. Value creation focuses on expanding the total benefits available rather than simply dividing existing benefits. This involves identifying opportunities where cooperation creates more value than either party could achieve independently, where your strengths complement others' needs, where innovative solutions serve everyone's interests better than conventional approaches. The contrast between value creation and value extraction determines whether negotiations produce sustainable agreements that both parties want to maintain and extend, or temporary agreements that one or both parties will seek to escape or renegotiate when circumstances allow. Emotional regulation under pressure. Strategic effectiveness requires emotional regulation that allows clear thinking and appropriate responses even when facing stress, pressure, frustration, or provocation. This regulation is not suppression of emotion, but rather conscious management of emotional responses to serve strategic rather than reactive purposes. The principle of strategic detachment involves maintaining psychological distance from outcomes so that your decision-making isn't compromised by excessive attachment to specific results. This allows you to adapt to changing circumstances, accept setbacks without becoming discouraged, and pursue alternatives when original approaches aren't succeeding. Strategic detachment is not indifference, but rather the emotional balance that allows persistent effort without desperate attachment, commitment without rigidity, caring without being controlled by your caring. Pressure management requires understanding that pressure often reveals character rather than creating it. The person who maintains composure, clear thinking, and appropriate behavior under pressure demonstrates reliability that builds others' confidence in their capability and judgment. Strategic breathing, mental rehearsal of challenging scenarios, physical exercise that builds stress tolerance, and perspective practices that maintain awareness of what's truly important versus what seems urgent. All of these contribute to emotional regulation that serves strategic effectiveness. The principle of controlled response involves choosing your reactions rather than being controlled by automatic emotional reactions to others' behavior. This requires recognition of your emotional triggers, development of alternative responses, and practice in implementing chosen responses rather than default reactions. For example, when someone criticizes your ideas or challenges your competence, automatic reactions might include defensive justification, counterattack on their competence, or emotional shutdown that prevents effective response. Controlled responses might include asking questions to understand their concerns, acknowledging valid points while maintaining confidence in your overall position, or requesting specific suggestions for improvement. Strategic empathy involves understanding others' emotions without being controlled by them, recognizing how emotional states influence behavior without allowing others' emotions to determine your responses. This allows you to respond to the situation that exists rather than reacting to the emotions that surround it. The ability to remain calm when others are emotional, clear when others are confused, and constructive when others are destructive provides significant advantages while also serving others by maintaining stability in situations that might otherwise deteriorate due to emotional reactivity. The integration, becoming strategically ethical. The ultimate goal of Machiavellian tactics is not to become manipulative or deceptive, but to become so strategically sophisticated that you can achieve your authentic objectives through methods that strengthen rather than compromise your character, that build rather than destroy your relationships, that create rather than extract value from your environment. This integration requires understanding that effectiveness and ethics are not opposites, but partners, that ethical people who lack strategic skills often fail to achieve their good intentions, while strategic people who lack ethical grounding often achieve hollow victories that don't provide lasting satisfaction or sustainable success. The principle of aligned authenticity involves becoming more yourself rather than less yourself as you develop strategic capabilities. Your tactics should serve your values rather than compromise them. Your methods should express your character rather than contradict it. Your success should enhance your integrity rather than requiring its sacrifice. This means that strategic development becomes a path of character development rather than character compromise. You learn to be more effective at being who you authentically are, rather than learning to be someone you're not, in order to achieve outcomes that wouldn't satisfy your authentic self. Value-based decision-making ensures that your strategic choices serve purposes that matter to you, rather than purposes you think should matter to you, or purposes that matter to others, but don't align with your authentic values and vision. This requires clarity about what you actually want versus what you think you should want, what would actually satisfy you versus what appears successful from external perspectives, what legacy you want to create versus what legacy others expect you to pursue. The principle of sustainable victory focuses on achieving outcomes that you can maintain and build upon, rather than temporary advantages that require constant effort to preserve, or that create so much resentment that others work constantly to reverse your success. Sustainable victories serve others' interests as well as your own, build your reputation and relationships rather than damaging them, create precedents you can live with rather than precedents that trap you in patterns you don't want to continue. Legacy consciousness involves making decisions based not just on immediate outcomes but on long-term consequences, how your current choices will affect your future options, how your current behavior will influence others' future willingness to trust and cooperate with you, how your current success will position you for continued growth and development. The person who thinks strategically about legacy makes choices that build rather than consume their reputation, that develop rather than exploit their relationships, that enhance rather than compromise their character. Practical application: the daily practice. Strategic living requires daily practices that develop and maintain the capabilities you need to navigate complex situations with wisdom, integrity, and effectiveness. These practices transform strategic thinking from occasional tactical responses into habitual excellence that serves you consistently. Daily observation practice involves paying attention to social dynamics, power relationships, communication patterns, and outcome patterns that most people overlook. This develops your ability to read situations accurately and predict how different approaches might be received. Strategic planning sessions, brief daily reviews of upcoming interactions, decisions, and challenges, allow you to approach situations with intention rather than simply reacting to whatever happens. This planning need not be elaborate. Even 5 minutes of consideration can significantly improve your effectiveness. Relationship maintenance involves regular attention to the key relationships that support your objectives, ensuring that these relationships receive appropriate investment rather than being taken for granted until you need something from them. Information review processes help you synthesize intelligence you've gathered, identify patterns you might have missed, and recognize opportunities or threats that require attention. This prevents important information from being overlooked amid the volume of daily input. Skill development focuses on continuously improving capabilities that provide strategic advantages: communication skills, emotional regulation, analytical thinking, creative problem solving, industry expertise, network development. The compound effect of consistent daily practice in strategic thinking and strategic relationship management creates capabilities that far exceed what most people develop through occasional tactical thinking during crisis situations. Strategic living becomes a form of personal development that enhances every area of your life while maintaining alignment with your authentic values and vision. You become more effective at being yourself, rather than becoming someone else to achieve effectiveness. Your ability to outsmart the world without losing your soul depends not on abandoning your values, but on implementing them with such strategic brilliance that you achieve your objectives while strengthening your character, serving others' authentic interests while serving your own, creating value while capturing value, building relationships while maintaining independence. The path requires patience to develop capabilities, rather than seeking immediate results, wisdom to choose battles that serve your long-term objectives, rather than fighting every battle that presents itself, and courage to act according to your authentic values, even when doing so requires more effort than compromising would require. The world needs people who combine strategic intelligence with authentic values, who achieve their objectives through methods that enhance, rather than diminish human potential, who demonstrate that effectiveness and ethics can be partners rather than competitors in the creation of meaningful success. Your journey towards strategic mastery begins with understanding that you already possess everything necessary to develop these capabilities: intelligence that can be trained, values that can be implemented strategically, relationships that can be developed authentically, and opportunities that can be recognized and acted upon with wisdom. The only question is whether you're willing to invest the effort required to develop strategic capabilities that serve your authentic self, rather than accepting the limitation that comes from avoiding strategic thinking because you fear it might compromise your values. Outsmart the world without losing your soul by becoming strategically brilliant at being authentically yourself, ethically sophisticated at achieving your genuine objectives, and tactically excellent at creating value for others while capturing value for yourself. The world is indeed a complex game, but it's a game you can master through intelligence, integrity, and strategic persistence applied consistently over time. Your authentic success, success that serves your values while achieving your objectives, awaits your commitment to developing the capabilities that make such success inevitable rather than accidental. Begin now. Think strategically. Act ethically. Win authentically.